Damien stood frozen. His heart pounded in his chest, but the rest of his body was still. He could hear Sophia's voice clearly from outside her flat, as if she were speaking directly to him. "You're the one I love. I do not care about Damien. He's simply a fool. I'm only with him for the money. And I'll get everything I can from him. Then we can be together." A deep chuckle followed. A man's voice. "I told you, babe. Rich men like Damien are easily fooled." Sophia giggled. "I know, right? He actually thinks I love him. It's pathetic." Damien's fingers clenched into fists. His throat burnt. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, had never loved him at all. Tonight was supposed to be special. Damien Adeyemi had planned everything down to the last detail. The rooftop dinner, the candles, the music, the breathtaking city view. And in the middle of it all, him on one knee, asking Sophia to be his wife. She had no idea what was coming. He had told her he'd be working late, just to make the surprise even bigger. But he had finished early. He wanted to do something romantic, pick her up himself, tell her how much he loved her, and then take her to the night she would never forget. But now he stood outside her apartment, listening to the woman he loved laugh about how easy he was to deceive. He felt heartbroken, then turned and walked away without a single word, without a single tear. That night, Damien drove aimlessly through the city. When he finally got home, he couldn't sleep that night. He knew his life would never be the same. He had turned off the lights, shut the curtains, closed his eyes, but sleep never came. Instead, the words replayed in his head like a broken record. "I don't care about Damien. He's just a fool. I'm only with him for his money." He sat up in bed, tears rolling down his face. No amount of money had prepared him for this kind of pain. And Damien Adeyemi was a man who had everything. Damien wasn't just rich. He was a young billionaire, a tech genius who built an empire from nothing. He had power. He had influence. He had wealth beyond imagination. Despite that, he couldn't find true love. The city girls are only interested in him for his money and connections. Not for love. They wanted to be seen with him. Wanted to be in the headlines. Wanted the luxury, the designer gifts, the expensive vacations. None of them wanted Damien, the man. They only wanted Damien, the billionaire. So when he met Sophia, he thought she was different. But now he knew the truth. She was just like the rest. One morning, as the sun had barely risen, Damien stood at the massive glass window of his mansion, staring at the breathtaking view of the city below. He had everything: a successful empire, wealth, and the admiration of millions. But none of it brought him happiness. He sighed heavily, lost in thought. His mind drifted back to that night. Sophia's voice, sweet and cruel, still echoed in his ears. "I don't care about Damien. He's just a fool. I'm only with him for his money. Rich guys like Damien are easy to fool. He actually thinks I love him." It's pathetic. No matter how much he tried, he couldn't erase those words. They had been the final proof of what he had known deep down all along. People didn't love him. They loved what he had. He could build an empire, make billions, be the most powerful man in the room. But when he stripped all of that away, what was left? Would anyone still choose him? Would anyone still love him? Damien clenched his jaw. He had to find out. And there was only one way to do that. His mother, Lady Lara, entered the room, her silk robe flowing behind her. "Son, you haven't touched your breakfast. Is something wrong?" Damien didn't turn. He kept his gaze on the city, the empire he had built. "Mother, I need to leave. I need to find something real." His voice was firm yet distant. His mother's face was filled with concern. "Leave? What do you mean?" Damien finally turned to face her, his piercing blue eyes filled with determination. "Every woman I meet wants my money, my name, my status. I want love, real love. And I know I won't find it here. I have to leave this life behind, just for a while." His father, Chief Adeyemi, stepped into the room, having overheard the conversation. Unlike Lara, he wasn't quick to oppose Damien's decision. Instead, he studied his son carefully. "And where exactly do you plan to go?" Damien exhaled, running a hand through his dark hair. Somewhere no one knows me. A village far from here. I'll disguise myself as a beggar, even a cripple. I want to see if someone can love me without wealth." Lady Lara gasped. "You will do no such thing. What if someone recognizes you? What if something happens to you?" Damien's voice remained steady. "I'll be careful, mother. But this is something I have to do." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Chief Adeyemi nodded. "If this is truly what you want, go. But be wise. And if you need us, we are just a call away." Lady Lara clutched Damien's hand, her grip tight, desperate. "Promise me you'll return." Damien hesitated. Then his expression softened. He pulled her into a tight embrace. "I promise." But deep down, he wasn't sure if he would ever come back the same. The road was rough, the sun merciless. Dust clung to Damien's skin as he wheeled himself through the unfamiliar village, his hands gripping the rusted rims of the wheelchair. He had never felt this exposed. No security guards. No expensive suits. No luxury cars waiting to take him wherever he pleased. Just him. Alone. In a wheelchair. The disguise was perfect. His once groomed hair was now messy. His face unshaven. His clothes ragged and dirty. He had become everything the world had never seen him as, a nobody. And the villagers noticed. But not with kindness. With whispers. With laughter. With suspicion. "Look at that young man. How can he be crippled at such an age?" One woman muttered as she walked past. "The gods are not that wicked," another responded, shaking her head. "It must be a curse. Maybe his past has caught up with him. Karma always finds its way back," an elderly man spat, his eyes filled with disgust. Damien kept his head down, but he heard everything. Every whisper. Every judgment. Every cruel assumption. "No man becomes crippled just like that," someone else added. "What if he's one of those Yahoo boys, serving a sacrifice to become rich?" The words stung. For the first time in his life, Damien understood what it felt like to be truly hated for nothing. No one knew him. No one knew his story. Yet they had already decided who he was. Mothers pulled their daughters away when he wheeled past. "Stay away from him," they whispered. "We don't know where he came from. He could bring bad luck to our home." Girls giggled, pointing at him. What kind of man sits in a wheelchair begging for food? If he was a real man, he would have found a way to walk by now. Men scoffed, watching him struggle with his wheels. If the gods truly loved him, they would have given him legs. But maybe he did something terrible in his past life. The words cut deeper than any betrayal Damien had ever known. Because this time, it wasn't just one person lying to him. It was an entire village turning their backs on him. He had wanted to know if someone could love him for who he was. But so far, all he had found was cruelty. Days passed, and loneliness crept into his bones. Damien sat in the same spot every day, his back pressed against the cold stone wall of the village market. The hunger was unbearable. His once strong body felt weak. His hands trembled as he held out a tin cup, hoping for a single coin, a piece of bread, anything. But no one stopped. No one cared. The whispers around him never faded. The gods must have cursed him. A young man in a wheelchair? He must have done something terrible in his past life. Don't go near him. Bad luck follows men like that. The more he heard, the more the weight of their words crushed him. This was worse than being used for his money. This was being invisible. But then, one afternoon, everything changed. She appeared like a flicker of light in his darkest hour. A young woman stopped in front of him. Her warm brown eyes held no judgment, only concern. Her name was Kamsi. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Damien looked up, surprised. No one had spoken to him in days. "I'm just trying to survive," he murmured. She hesitated, then reached into her small woven bag and pulled out a 500 naira note. "It's not much, but I hope it helps. Do you have a place to sleep?" He hesitated before shaking his head. "No." Kamsi's brows furrowed in concern. She bit her lip, thinking for a moment. Then, without another word, she turned and ran. "Wait here." Damien watched her go, his heart pounding. What was she doing? Kamsi ran through the narrow dirt paths of the village, her bare feet kicking up dust. She reached a small, crumbling hut near the river, the place she called home. Inside, her father sat mending an old fishing net, his hands rough from years of labor. "Papa," she said breathlessly, "I met someone, a beggar. He has nowhere to sleep. Can we help him?" Her father, tired and worn, sighed, rubbing his forehead. "A crippled beggar?" He glanced at her, his face filled with worry. "Kamsi, we have little as it is." She swallowed hard. He was right. They were the poorest family in the village. People looked down on them, mocked them, said they had nothing to offer. But Kamsi had something. A heart that refused to look away. "I know, Papa. But we can't just leave him on the streets." Her father stared at her for a long moment. Then finally he sighed and nodded. "All right. Bring him." Kamsi's face lit up with excitement. She turned and ran as fast as she could. Damien had already convinced himself she wasn't coming back. Why would she? Everyone else had turned their backs on him. But then he saw her, running toward him, breathless, smiling. "Come with me," she said, her voice filled with warmth. Damien hesitated. He had spent years around people who only wanted him for what he had. And now he had nothing. Why was she helping him? But there was something about Kamsi. Something real. So, with a deep breath, he followed her. Days turned into weeks. And slowly, Damien started to change. Kamsi and her father had little, but they shared everything they had. They worked in the fields, growing crops with their bare hands. They fished in the river, laughing even when the catch was small. They had nothing, yet they were happier than anyone he had ever known. Damien watched Kamsi, admiring her strength. Despite the hardships, she was always smiling, always hopeful. And for the first time in a long time, Damien felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. But trouble lurked in the shadows. For weeks, Damien had found peace in the little things. Kamsi's laughter, the warmth of a shared meal, the quiet moments under the moonlit sky. But peace never lasts. Not when greed and jealousy live among men. A known rich man in the village, Chitty, had set his eyes on Kamsi. He had asked for her hand in marriage many times. And every time, Kamsi had the same answer. "I don't love you, Chitty." But Chitty wasn't a man who accepted rejection. So, he started showing up at her home, bringing expensive gifts, whispering in her father's ear. "You need someone wealthy to take care of you," he told Kamsi. "Not some beggar. Or are you not tired of poverty? I will take care of you." Kamsi stood her ground, but not everyone saw things the way she did. Her best friend, Amanda, sighed in frustration. "Kamsi, what's wrong with you? Chitty is rich. He can give you everything. Why waste your time on a cripple?" She paused, folding her arms. "Or do you love him?" Kamsi didn't hesitate. "Because he is kind. Because he listens to me. Because when I look into his eyes, I see a good heart," she argued. Amanda scoffed. "A good heart won't feed you, Kamsi." But Kamsi didn't care. Because she had never cared about wealth. And every time she looked at Damien, she saw a man who deserved to be seen, not pitied. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Damien sat alone, staring into the distance. Children laughed in the fields. Women gossiped by the well. Life moved on, but inside him, a storm was brewing. Kamsi noticed. She always noticed. She sat beside him, her voice soft. "Why do you look so sad?" For a moment, Damien didn't answer. Then he exhaled, his hands clenching the wheels of his chair. "I don't want to live like this," he finally admitted. "I deserve to walk. I deserve to be a man who can stand on his own. But I can't. I don't have the money for surgery." His voice broke slightly, and Kamsi's heart clenched. She had never heard him speak like this. So much pain. So much hopelessness. She placed a gentle hand on his. "Don't worry. Everything will be well," she whispered. But her heart ached, because she knew words alone wouldn't change anything. That night, Kamsi sat with her father, watching him mend his old fishing net, his hands rough from years of work. "Papa," she began hesitantly. He looked up. She took a deep breath. "Damien, he wants to walk again. But he can't afford surgery." Her father's hands stilled. A long silence followed. Then, without a word, he stood up and walked outside. Kamsi followed, confusion filling her chest. "Papa!" He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I will sell the land." Kamsi's breath caught. "Papa, are you sure?" "This is all we have," she whispered. Her father looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "He deserves a chance at a better life, child." Tears burned in Kamsi's eyes. She knew what this meant. Without the land, they had nothing. No way to farm. No way to survive. But her father, he had made up his mind. When Damien found out, his heart nearly stopped. They were willing to give up everything for him. Everything. And yet, he was still lying. His stomach twisted with guilt. This wasn't what he wanted. They were supposed to teach him about real love, not sacrifice everything for a man who had everything but had chosen to pretend he had nothing. How could he keep lying? How could he watch them suffer for a lie? Tears burned behind his eyes, but he blinked them away. Because he knew. The truth had to come out. But when it did, would Kamsi ever forgive him? Would she ever look at him the same way again? Or would he lose the only real love he had ever known? One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, Damien sat in the small garden behind Kamsi's home. The air was warm, filled with the scent of wildflowers, but inside him a storm raged. He had spent weeks trying to push the guilt away, trying to justify his actions. But he couldn't anymore. Not after everything Kamsi and her father had sacrificed for him. So tonight, the truth would come out. And he prayed it wouldn't destroy him. Kamsi walked toward him, her soft brown eyes searching his face. She could sense something was wrong. "You look troubled," she said, sitting beside him. Damien swallowed hard. His hands clenched into fists. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice heavy. Kamsi tilted her head, concern deepening her features. "What is it?" For the first time in a long time, Damien was afraid. Afraid of losing her. Afraid of what she would see when she looked at him after tonight. But it was too late to turn back. So he inhaled deeply and said the words that would change everything. "I'm not who you think I am. I'm not crippled. I'm not poor. I'm Damien Adeyemi, the billionaire." Silence. Kamsi froze. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "What?" she finally whispered. Then before her eyes, Damien stood. For the first time in months, he stood. Kamsi gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "I came here pretending to be crippled because I wanted to see if someone could love me for who I am, not for my wealth. And you showed me what real love looks like." But Kamsi didn't smile. She didn't run into his arms. Instead, her eyes filled with tears. "So, everything was a lie? The pain, the struggle, all of it?" "Not the way I feel about you," Damien said quickly. He reached for her, but she stepped back. "You deceived me, Damien. You let my father sacrifice everything for you. You let me fall in love with a lie. Kamsi, please. Don't." Her voice cracked as she shook her head. "I never want to see you again." And before he could say another word, she turned and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. Damien stood there, his entire world crashing down around him. Not far away, someone had been watching. Amanda. She had always envied Kamsi. Envied the way Damien looked at her. Envied the love she had found. But now there was an opening. She approached Damien slowly, her lips curling into a smile. "You're a billionaire?" she whispered, stepping closer. "Forget Kamsi, she's just a village girl. I can love you." She placed a delicate hand on his arm. Damien stepped back instantly. "You don't even know me." Amanda's smile didn't falter. "I know enough. I can make you forget her," she purred. But Damien didn't want anyone else. He wanted Kamsi. Back in the city, Lady Lara sat by the window, staring into the night. "I hope he's okay," she whispered. Her husband, Chief Adeyemi, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "He will return when he's ready," he said calmly. But Damien wasn't ready. He had lost the only woman who had loved him for who he was. And now he didn't know if he would ever get her back. Damien had never known regret like this. For years, he had believed that money could fix anything, that power could erase mistakes. But now, standing outside Kamsi's home, he realized how wrong he had been. He had broken the heart of the one person who had loved him for who he truly was. And no amount of wealth could undo that. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the wooden door. Kamsi's father opened it, his eyes calm yet unreadable. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Damien said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I need you to know that I am truly sorry. I never meant to hurt Kamsi, or you. I will never forget the kindness you showed me. I just wanted to say that." Kamsi's father studied him for a long moment before speaking. "Son, mistakes happen. But trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild." Damien nodded, his chest tightening. "Give her time, Damien. Time heals all wounds." Damien swallowed the lump in his throat. He wanted to stay. He wanted to fight for her. But he also knew he had already done enough damage. So, with a heavy heart, he walked away. And for the first time, leaving felt like the hardest thing he had ever done. When Damien arrived at his family's mansion, Lady Lara was waiting for him at the entrance. Tears filled her eyes as she pulled him into a tight embrace. "Welcome back home, son," she whispered. But Damien didn't feel home, because his heart was still in that little village with the woman he had lost. Days passed, but nothing felt the same. Damien couldn't focus on work. He wasn't happy at home. Even in the middle of business meetings, his thoughts drifted back to Kamsi, her laughter, her kindness, her strength. Lady Lara noticed, and like any mother, she thought she had the solution. "Damien, darling, you need to move on. Kemi just got back from the UK. You two were childhood friends. A date wouldn't hurt," she suggested one evening. Damien sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mama, I don't think that arrangement will work. My heart belongs to someone else." But Lady Lara was persistent. "Just one dinner, Damien. No pressure." After days of endless persuasion, Damien finally gave in. The restaurant in Lekki was one of the finest in the city. The lights were dim, the air filled with soft music and the scent of expensive dishes. But Damien didn't belong here. He sat across from Kemi, but his mind was elsewhere. Every time she spoke, her voice faded into the background. His heart was still in the village. With Kamsi. "Damien, are you okay?" Kemi finally asked, noticing his absent stare. "Yeah," he muttered. But even he knew it was a lie. The dinner was dull. There was no connection. Within an hour, they both agreed to leave. And as Damien drove home, he knew. This wasn't his life anymore. That night, Lady Lara found Damien sitting in his study, staring blankly at the fireplace. "What's wrong, my son?" she asked softly. Damien exhaled, his shoulders slumping. "Mama, I lied to her. I lied to Kamsi. And her father, they sacrificed everything to make me happy. But all I brought them was pain." His mother's gaze softened. "Do you truly love this woman?" she asked. Damien lifted his head, his eyes filled with certainty. "Yes, Mama. With all my heart." Lady Lara smiled, placing a gentle hand on his. "Then follow your heart, son. It's never too late to make things right." Kamsi missed him. Even though she had told herself she was better off without him, her heart ached for Damien. She had spent weeks trying to forget him. But how do you forget someone who had become a part of you? She had wanted to forgive him that night. But the pain, the betrayal, it had been too much. Now, all she could think about was how she had let him go, and how much she wished he had stayed. Then one day, the entire village came to a standstill. A convoy of luxury cars rolled into the dusty roads, sleek and gleaming under the afternoon sun. Armed security guards stepped out first, scanning the surroundings. And then, Damien stepped out. The real Damien. No more ragged clothes. No more wheelchair. Just him in an expensive black suit, looking powerful, confident, yet broken. Kamsi's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she saw him as the billionaire the world knew him to be. Yet, all she could see was the man she had loved. The man she still loved. Damien took a deep breath, stepping toward her. "Kamsi," he began, his voice raw with emotion. "I'm sorry. I brought you pain. I lied. I deceived you. But if there's one thing I never faked, it was my love for you." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "I can't sleep. I can't concentrate at work. I've tried to move on, but I can't. Because my heart belongs to you. He stepped closer, his voice breaking. Please forgive me. Kamsi turned to her father, her heart pounding. The old man met her gaze. And with a small nod, he gave his blessing. That was all she needed. With tears streaming down her face, she ran into Damien's arms. I forgive you, she whispered. Damien held her tightly, as if letting go would mean losing her all over again. Then slowly he pulled back. And right there, in front of the entire village, he knelt on one knee. A small gasp ran through the crowd as he pulled out a velvet box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. Kamsi, he said, his voice full of love. Will you marry me? Tears slid down her cheeks as she smiled. Yes, Damien. 1,000 times yes. The crowd erupted into cheers as he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her like she was the only woman in the world. Damien had come to the village searching for love. And in the end, he found it. Not in riches, not in power, but in a woman who saw past the wealth and loved him for the man he truly was. And from that moment on, Damien Adeyemi and Kamsi began the greatest love story ever told. Forever. And always.